The weakest cry Samuel Grant had ever heard did not come from a grown man on a battlefield, or from a sailor pulled half-conscious from dark water, or from anyone he had once fought to save. It came from a puppy no bigger than his two hands, fighting to stay alive on a frozen porch in the middle of a Montana snowstorm. Before we go any further, tell me where you are watching from today. And if you believe one small act of kindness can change the entire direction of a life, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the moment that changes everything does not arrive with a warning. Sometimes it just scratches softly at your door. The wind arrived before the snow that night. It rolled down through the mountains in long, mournful waves, bending the pine trees behind Samuel's cabin and rattling the old windows in their frames. Dry leaves skittered across the frozen ground like frightened little animals. Somewhere beyond the porch light, the forest disappeared into darkness, and beyond that, the valley opened wide and empty beneath a sky heavy with winter. At 73 years old, Samuel knew storms the way other men knew old friends. He knew when a storm was merely noisy, and he knew when one deserved respect. This one deserved respect. He sat beside the fireplace with a mug of black coffee cooling between his hands. The flames snapped and shifted, throwing orange light across the walls of the cabin he had built for himself after leaving behind a life of uniforms, orders, and too many memories. The cabin stood almost 20 miles from the nearest town, tucked at the edge of a pine forest where the road narrowed to gravel and then to ruts, and where cell service came and went like a bad rumor. Most people would have called it lonely. Samuel called it peaceful. Loneliness had a sharp edge. Peace did not. At least that was what he told himself. Years earlier, after losing his wife, Marlene, to cancer, and after retiring from a lifetime of service that had taken more from him than he liked to admit, Samuel had come to this place because it asked nothing of him. The mountains did not ask him to explain why he woke before sunrise every morning. The trees did not ask why. He kept his back to the wall in restaurants. The snow did not ask why there were framed photographs in a drawer he rarely opened. Here, there were no crowds, no pitying looks, no neighbors stopping by with casseroles and questions. Just timber, stone, weather, and the kind of silence that let a man pretend he had finally made peace with everything he had survived. Outside, the first snowflakes began to drift through the darkness. Samuel looked toward the window and watched them flicker past the glass. Another long winter night. Nothing unusual. Nothing he could not handle. Then he heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. His eyes narrowed. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the wind. For a few seconds, he assumed a loose branch had blown against the porch railing, or that a piece of frozen bark was scraping along the boards. The cabin was old enough to complain in bad weather. He had learned not to jump at every noise. Then it came again. Scratch, scratch. This time, beneath it, there was something else. A whimper. Samuel set his coffee down slowly. The sound was so weak it barely seemed real. No animal should have been outside in weather like this. The temperature had already dropped into the teens, and the radio had warned that it would fall lower before morning. Even coyotes stayed hidden on nights like this if they had sense. He stood, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the deadbolt. Old habits rose inside him without invitation. Listen first. Breathe. Assess. Another whimper reached him. Small. Desperate. Human beings often imagine emergencies arriving loudly, with sirens, screams, and shattered glass. Samuel knew better. The worst ones often came quietly. A strange silence on a radio. A light where no light should be. A cry so faint that a man could miss it if he had the television turned up too high. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. Cold air rushed inside so fast it seemed to shove the warmth backward. Snow swirled across the porch in wild white ribbons. For a moment, Samuel saw nothing except darkness and moving flakes in the beam of the porch light. Then his eyes adjusted. A German shepherd stood at the edge of the steps. She was large, but too thin under her thick winter coat. Snow clung to her back and shoulders. Ice had gathered in the fur around her chest. Her ears were upright, but her body shook with exhaustion. Her amber eyes reflected the porch light, steady and pleading at the same time. But it was not the shepherd that stopped Samuel's breath. It was what lay beneath her. 5 tiny puppies were huddled together on the frozen boards, tucked as close to their mother's body as they could get. They were so young they still looked unfinished, all rounded bellies, soft ears, and trembling paws. One moved weakly. Another made a sound so thin it barely counted as a cry. The smallest did not move at all. Samuel felt something tighten in his chest. The mother dog had brought her family through a winter storm to his door. Somehow, she had crossed snow, darkness, and freezing wind with 5 fragile lives depending on her. Somehow, she had known there might be help here. "Easy, girl," Samuel said softly. The German shepherd held his gaze. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Samuel had been around enough dogs to know fear when he saw it. This was not fear. Not exactly. The dog was exhausted, cautious, and desperate, but she was not backing away. Then she did something he would remember for the rest of his life. She lowered her head, nudged the smallest puppy gently with her nose, and pushed it toward him. Trust. Pure, impossible trust. Samuel crouched immediately. Years of military training, years of discipline, years of telling himself he was done being responsible for anyone else, all vanished beneath an older instinct. Protect the vulnerable. That's it, he whispered. I've got you. The first puppy felt painfully cold when he lifted it. Too cold. Its tiny body rested against his palm with almost no strength. He tucked it inside his jacket against his chest, then reached for another. The mother dog watched every movement, her eyes following his hands, but she did not growl. Come on, he said. Let's get your babies inside. The shepherd followed him through the doorway without hesitation. Within minutes, Samuel's quiet cabin became a small emergency room. He spread thick blankets across the living room floor near the fireplace, warm towels, filled a shallow bowl with water, and pulled down an old crate from the storage room. He moved steadily, carefully, without panic. Panic wasted energy. Panic blurred judgment. He had learned that a lifetime ago. The puppies curled together beneath layers of soft fabric while heat slowly returned to their little bodies. One by one, their whimpers grew stronger. Their paws twitched. Their noses moved. The smallest puppy, the one that had not moved on the porch, released a faint sound that made Samuel close his eyes for half a second in relief. The mother stayed close enough to touch them at any moment. Samuel found a can of plain chicken, warmed a little water, and set it down for her. She sniffed it once, then looked at her puppies as if asking permission from the lives she had nearly spent herself saving. Only after Samuel stepped back did she eat. Not greedily, not like a wild stray. She ate carefully, pausing every few bites to check the litter. You came a long way, Samuel murmured. The shepherd looked at him, then at the puppies, then back toward the door. Something about that look stayed with him. It was not only gratitude. It was not only worry. It was as though she had brought him one part of a story and was waiting for him to understand the rest. Hours passed. Snow piled against the windows. The fire burned hot. The cabin filled with the smell of wet fur, wood smoke, and warm towels. Samuel sat on the floor beside the litter, his knees stiff, his back aching, his coffee forgotten on the table. The puppies were warmer now, but not well. Several looked unusually weak. One could not seem to lift its head. Another tried to crawl toward its mother and collapsed after only a few inches. Their bellies were not full enough for healthy pups. Their little bodies were fighting too hard. The shepherd watched Samuel watching them. You know, don't you? He said quietly. Her ears moved. You knew they needed more than warmth. She rested her head beside the smallest puppy and let out a long breath. Only then did Samuel notice how tired she truly was. Not just physically tired. Worn down. Hollowed. Out. The kind of tired that came from surviving past the point where survival made sense. He reached out slowly and scratched behind her ears. She did not lean into his hand at first. Then, after a moment, she allowed herself to rest the weight of her head on his wrist. The gesture did something to him. For years, Samuel had kept his life small on purpose. He had convinced himself that if he did not let anyone need him, he would not have to lose anyone again. But now a starving mother dog lay beside his fireplace with 5 puppies wrapped in his blankets, and every careful wall he had built inside himself suddenly seemed much thinner than before. He barely slept that night. The storm kept shaking the cabin, but Samuel listened past it for the sounds of the puppies. Every time one whimpered, he opened his eyes. Every time the smallest puppy's breathing changed, he sat forward. The shepherd seemed to understand his concern. She barely moved from the little one's side. Just before sunrise, the smallest puppy cried. Samuel was out of the chair before he knew he had moved. He lifted the pup into his hands. It was warmer than before, but its breathing was shallow and uneven. Its mouth opened slightly with each breath, as if even air had become work. "No," Samuel whispered. "Not after all that." By dawn, the storm had weakened enough for travel. Snow still covered the valley, but the main road might be passable if he went slowly. Samuel called the veterinary clinic in town as soon as he had a signal. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep until he explained what had happened. "Bring them in," she said. "Now, if you can get here safely." Samuel lined a large crate with towels warmed by the fire. He placed the puppies inside one by one. The shepherd climbed into the truck without being asked, settling beside the crate as though she had done this before. She never took her eyes off the litter. The nearest veterinary clinic was nearly 30 miles away. The drive took almost twice as long. The truck moved through a world made white and silent by snow. Frost coated every pine branch. Fences appeared and disappeared beside the road like broken lines. On a map, twice, Samuel had to stop and ease around drifts. Once, the rear tires slid toward a ditch before catching gravel again. He drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw tight, eyes moving from the road to the crate and back again. The shepherd sat alert the entire way. At the clinic, Dr. Elaine Porter met them at the back entrance wearing jeans, boots, and a coat thrown over her scrubs. Her gray hair was pulled into a hurried knot, and her expression changed the moment she saw the puppies. "Bring them straight in," she said. "Warm lights, stainless steel, soft towels, gloved hands." Samuel stood beside the exam table while Dr. Porter and her assistant worked. They checked temperature, hydration, breathing, heartbeats. They warmed fluids and prepared formula. The mother dog stood so close that her nose nearly touched the table. "What's her name?" Dr. Porter asked. Samuel looked down at the shepherd. "I don't know." The dog lifted her head when he spoke, as if she understood the question. Dr. Porter checked the faded tag on the collar, but ice and age had worn most of the engraving smooth. Only one word remained clear. "Luna." Samuel repeated it softly. "Luna." The shepherd's ears rose. Dr. Porter looked at him. "Looks like she told you." For the first time that morning, Samuel almost smiled. The smile did not last. "You brought them just in time," the veterinarian said after the first examinations were done. Samuel folded his arms. "How bad?" "The smallest one is in the most trouble. Dehydration, low body temperature, probable malnutrition. But several of them have been struggling for days." Dr. Porter looked toward Luna with quiet admiration. "This mother kept them alive longer than I would have thought possible." Luna's eyes moved from the veterinarian to Samuel. "Can they recover?" Samuel asked. "With care," Dr. Porter said. "Warmth, feeding, medication, close monitoring. No guarantees on the smallest, but they have a chance." A chance. Samuel had learned to respect that word. A chance was not a promise, but it was not nothing. Sometimes a chance was the only thing standing between loss and a miracle. By afternoon, he returned to the cabin with medication. Special formula, instructions written in Dr. Porter's firm handwriting, and 5 puppies who looked a little less like fading sparks. Luna climbed out of the truck slowly, but when Samuel carried the crate inside, she followed him with purpose. For the next few days, the cabin ran on feedings, fires, medicine, and short stretches of uneasy sleep. Samuel measured formula with the focus of a man handling explosives. He set alarms. He cleaned towels. He kept notes on a yellow legal pad, tracking which puppy ate, which one cried, which one slept too long. Dr. Porter called twice a day, and Samuel answered with more detail than she probably needed. The smallest puppy became his private worry. He named the others only in his head at first. Bold one, sleepy one, loud one, climber. But the smallest he began calling Little Scout, because every time it survived another hour, it felt as if it had crossed some invisible line in enemy territory. On the 4th morning, Little Scout lifted his head. It lasted only a second. Then he flopped sideways onto his brother. But Samuel laughed out loud, a rusty sound that startled even him. Luna looked up from the blankets, and for a moment something soft passed between them. "You saw that," he said. Luna blinked slowly. The puppies were improving, but Luna was not at peace. Every morning shortly after sunrise, she walked to the front door and stared outside. At first Samuel thought she simply needed to relieve herself or stretch her legs. He took her out, watched her circle the yard, and expected her to return. But she did not wander like a dog looking for exercise. She stood facing the eastern tree line, still as a statue. Sometimes she paced. Sometimes she sat. Sometimes she looked back at Samuel with a patience that felt almost like disappointment. On the fifth morning, he opened the door and said, "All right, show me." Luna stepped onto the porch, looked toward the trees, then back at him. Samuel grabbed his coat, gloves, and a flashlight even though the sun was rising. He made sure the puppies were asleep near the fire and left extra wood stacked by the hearth. Then he followed Luna into the snow. She did not run. She guided. That was the only word for it. She moved with steady purpose along a path almost hidden beneath drifts, pausing at turns only long enough to make sure Samuel was still behind her. The forest swallowed them gradually. Pine branches hung heavy under fresh snow. Their footsteps sounded too loud in the cold morning air. Samuel's body remembered how to move through difficult terrain. His knees complained, but his instincts sharpened. He watched the ground, the trees, Luna's posture. Every so often she lowered her nose to the snow, not searching, but confirming. After nearly 40 minutes, they reached a narrow clearing tucked between two low hills. Luna stopped beside a fallen fence line. Beyond it stood an abandoned cabin. It was small, weather-beaten, and almost hidden by time. Part of the roof had collapsed. One shutter hung crooked from a single hinge. A rusted stovepipe leaned at an angle. Snow had drifted against the front door, which stood partly open, moving slightly in the wind. Samuel understood before he stepped inside. This was where the story had begun. He crossed the broken fence carefully. Luna followed close behind, ears high, body tense. The interior smelled of damp wood, dust, old smoke, and something else that made Luna lower her head. Home, or what had once been home. Weak sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof. Snow had blown across the floorboards. A broken chair rested near one wall. Old blankets lay piled in a corner, flattened into a nest. Beside them were empty food containers, a cracked plastic bowl, and scraps of cardboard that looked as if they had been dragged there for warmth. Samuel crouched near the blankets. The indentation was unmistakable. Luna had given birth here. In this abandoned place, through freezing nights and hunger, she had kept 5 puppies alive with nothing but instinct, loyalty, and a will stronger than the storm. Samuel swallowed hard. "You should not have had to do this alone," he said. Luna stood beside him, silent. He searched the cabin carefully. Not because he expected treasure, but because Luna had brought him here for a reason. In one corner, beneath a fallen board, he found a faded photograph. He brushed dust from it with his thumb. A family smiled in front of the cabin many years earlier. A man in a work shirt. A woman with kind eyes. 2 children. And beside them sat a German shepherd with the same proud posture and amber gaze as Luna. On the back, written in faded ink, were 4 words. "Always find your way home." Samuel read them twice. Luna watched him. Outside, she led him to a sagging shed behind the cabin. Inside, beneath a tarp, Samuel found a metal container. The latch was stiff, but it opened. The box held veterinary records, dog licenses, old receipts, property documents, and a handful of folded letters. Most belonged to a family named Mercer. The most recent veterinary records belonged to Luna. Vaccinations, health checks, registration, emergency contact. Caroline Mercer, a town nearly 60 miles away. Samuel sat on an overturned crate and looked from the records to Luna. The meaning settled slowly. "You weren't a stray," he said. Luna lowered herself to the floor, as if the weight of being known had finally become too much. Tucked inside the box was one handwritten note, folded carefully despite years of damp and cold. The ink had faded, but the words remained readable. "If anything happens to us, please take care of Luna. She is family. Family." The word hit Samuel harder than he expected. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. The abandoned cabin felt different after that. Less like a ruin. More like a place where love had once lived and then been forced to leave too quickly. When Samuel and Luna returned home that evening, the puppies were sleeping near the fire. Their little bodies rose and fell beneath the blankets. Luna checked each one, then finally lay down with a sigh so deep Samuel felt it in his own chest. He spread the documents across the kitchen table after dinner. Names, dates, addresses, clues. The phone number on Luna's record was disconnected. That did not surprise him. But the address remained, and by noon the next day, curiosity had become responsibility. Samuel loaded supplies into the truck and asked his neighbor, a retired school bus driver named Earl, to sit with the puppies for a few hours. Earl had come by after. Hearing from Dr. Porter that Samuel had rescued a litter, and despite claiming he was not a dog person, he had spent 20 minutes letting one puppy chew his bootlace. Luna watched Samuel prepare to leave. When he opened the passenger door, she stepped forward and waited. "You want to come too?" he asked. Her ears lifted. "All right," Samuel said. "But if this gets complicated, you're doing the talking." The drive took them out of the valley and along county roads bordered by snowy fields, barbed wire fences, and farmhouses with smoke rising from chimneys. Luna sat upright for nearly the entire trip. Every time Samuel glanced at her, she looked ahead as if she knew the road. The address led to a modest white farmhouse outside a small town called Waverly. Bare cottonwoods stood around the yard. A porch swing moved slightly in the wind. The place looked lived in, cared for, and older than the subdivision creeping toward it from the far side of town. Samuel parked by the gravel drive and stepped out. Luna followed close to his leg. Before he could knock, the door opened. An elderly woman stood there in a blue cardigan, one hand resting on the frame. Her silver hair was pinned back, and her face carried the careful politeness of someone used to strangers bringing bad news. "Can I help you?" she asked. Then she saw Luna. The woman went perfectly still. Her hand rose to her mouth. Her eyes filled so quickly that Samuel knew, before she said a word, that they had found the right person. "Luna," she whispered. The German shepherd stood frozen. Her ears lifted. Her tail moved once. Then again. The woman stepped onto the porch. "Luna." This time the dog crossed the distance. Not wildly. Not like a puppy. She moved with quiet certainty, as if she were walking across years instead of porch boards. Caroline Mercer sank to her knees despite the cold, and Luna pressed her head into the woman's chest. For a long moment, there were no explanations. Only an old woman holding a dog she had mourned, and a dog leaning into a person she had never stopped remembering. Samuel turned his face toward the yard and let them have the moment. Inside, Caroline made coffee with shaking hands. Luna lay near her chair, watching her as though afraid she might vanish. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, wood polish, and something baking in the oven. Photographs covered one wall. Children, grandchildren, birthdays, soldiers, school pictures, dogs. Caroline told the story slowly. Her family had owned the mountain cabin for decades. Her husband, Daniel, had loved the place. Their daughter had grown up there. Her grandson, Noah, had spent summers roaming the woods with Luna and another German shepherd named Ranger. Then Daniel died after a heart attack. Medical bills and property taxes piled up. Caroline's daughter got a job in Spokane and needed to move quickly. The mountain property became too much to keep. "We were packing," Caroline said, her eyes on Luna. 3 days before we left, she disappeared. Samuel listened without interrupting. "We searched everywhere. Called the sheriff's office. Put up flyers at the feed store, the gas station, the veterinary clinic." Noah was 15. He walked those woods until his feet blistered. Her voice broke. He blamed himself. "Why?" Samuel asked gently. Caroline wiped her eyes with a folded napkin. "Because Luna had already lost Ranger." At the name, Luna lifted her head. Samuel noticed. Caroline did too. "Ranger was our older shepherd," she said. "He disappeared in a storm a few months before we moved." Luna kept going back to the old barn where they used to sleep in summer. Noah thought maybe she was still looking for him. Then one morning, she was gone too. The room grew quiet. Samuel looked down at Luna. The pieces did not form a full picture yet, but the shape of the grief became clearer. Caroline showed him photographs. Luna as a puppy beside a much younger Caroline. Luna running through a field with a boy who had bright eyes and a crooked grin. Luna and Ranger lying side by side beneath the cabin porch. Noah with one arm around Luna's neck, both of them looking as if the world was safe because they had each other. She was never just a dog, Caroline said. She was family. Samuel took out the note he had found in the shed. Caroline covered her mouth when she saw it. "Daniel wrote that," she whispered. She held the paper as if it were something living. Samuel showed her a photograph he had taken of the puppies by the fire. Caroline smiled through fresh tears. "Those are her babies." 5 of them, Samuel said. "They're getting stronger." Caroline looked at Luna, who had rested her head on the woman's slipper. Then she found a reason to keep going. Samuel thought of the frozen porch. The smallest cry. The way Luna had nudged her puppy toward his hands. Yes, he said quietly. She did. Before Samuel left, Caroline went upstairs and returned with a small wooden box. The corners were worn smooth, and the lid had Noah's initials carved into it. These were his, she said. He moved out years ago, but he left some things behind. I think Luna should have them. Inside were photographs, an old collar with Luna's name on it, and a journal written in a teenage boy's uneven handwriting. Samuel accepted the box carefully. Would you like to come see the puppies? He asked. Caroline looked at Luna, then at Samuel. More than anything. 2 days later, Caroline arrived at Samuel's cabin carrying homemade soup, a bag of puppy supplies, and the kind of hope that made her look younger. When Luna saw her step through the door, she went to her immediately. The puppies, now stronger, tumbled and squeaked at Caroline's feet. Caroline knelt among them and laughed with tears on her cheeks. This one is Bossy, she said as one puppy tried to climb into her lap. That's Loud One, Samuel said before he could stop himself. Caroline looked up. You named them? Not officially. She smiled. Of course not. Over the next week, Caroline visited often. She fed puppies, folded blankets, washed bowls, and told Samuel stories about the Mercer family. The cabin changed under the weight of those visits. It no longer felt like a place where a man hid from the world. It felt like a place where the world had found him anyway. One evening, after Caroline left and the puppies were asleep, Samuel opened Noah's journal. At first, the entries were ordinary. School complaints, fishing trips, weather notes, arguments with his mother, a drawing of Ranger wearing sunglasses, a list of names Noah had. Considered for a future dog rescue he wanted to start one day. Then Samuel found a passage that made him pause. Dad says Luna thinks every lost thing deserves a home. She found a hurt deer fawn by the creek today and would not leave until Grandpa came. Last month, she found kittens under the feed shed. Ranger pretended not to care, but he slept beside them all night. Samuel read the sentence again. Every lost thing deserves a home. He looked across the room at Luna, sleeping beside her puppies beneath the firelight. Maybe that was why she had chosen his door. Maybe she had seen in his isolated cabin what no person had seen in years. Another lost thing. Another creature that needed a home, whether he knew it or not. Near the back of the journal, the tone changed. Ranger missing. Storm bad. Luna keeps going to the barn. Then, Grandpa says animals grieve, even if people pretend they don't. Then, Luna waited at the barn again. I think she believes Ranger will come back if she stays long enough. The final pages referenced an old barn deeper in the mountains, a place Luna visited repeatedly before she disappeared. Samuel closed the journal and looked up. Luna was awake. Her eyes were fixed on him. The next morning, Caroline stayed at the cabin to watch the puppies while Samuel followed Luna into the mountains again. This time the journey was longer. The road narrowed, then disappeared beneath snow. Samuel parked near a ridge and continued on foot. The air was thin and bright. The sky looked like polished steel. Luna moved with certainty. They crossed a frozen creek, climbed through a stand of lodgepole pines, and descended into a forgotten valley where an old red barn leaned against the years. Half the roof had collapsed. One wall bowed outward. Wind moved through the broken boards with a low, hollow sound. Luna stopped at the entrance. Samuel stood beside her. You waited here, he said. She did not look at him. Inside, dust lay beneath snow where the roof had failed. Old stalls lined one side. Rusted tools hung from pegs. In the far corner, Luna nosed at a loose plank near the ground. Samuel crouched and pulled it free. Behind it was a small metal box. Inside were letters, photographs, and a worn leather collar. Luna lowered her head and touched the collar with her nose. Samuel knew before he read the name. Ranger. The photographs showed Luna and Ranger together, running through summer grass, lying beneath the porch, standing beside Noah at the barn door. In one picture, Ranger's muzzle was already gray. Luna leaned against him, young and bright-eyed. The letters were Noah's. He had written them after Ranger disappeared, as if writing could keep the dog from becoming only a memory. I keep thinking Luna hears him. She waits by the barn every Thursday. I told her he would come home, but I do not know if I believe it anymore. The last letter was folded separately. If we have to leave before Luna stops waiting, I hope she forgives us. I hope she knows I would stay if I could. I hope every dog gets to find who they are looking for, even if it takes a long time. Samuel lowered the paper. The barn seemed quieter than before. All at once, he understood why Luna had not simply moved on. She had lost Ranger. Then she had lost Noah. Then she had lost Caroline. One by one, every piece of home had vanished, and still she returned to the places where love had once been. For years, she had been surviving inside the ruins of what she remembered. Samuel sat on an old beam and rested his hand on her shoulder. "You never stopped looking," he said. Luna gazed toward the open barn door, where sunlight spilled across the snow. "No," Samuel whispered. "I suppose you didn't." He brought the collar, letters, and photographs back to the cabin. That evening, he and Caroline sat at the kitchen table while Luna rested near the puppies. Caroline read Noah's letters with one hand pressed to her chest. She cried quietly, but there was peace in the tears too. "I need to call him," she said. Noah was grown now, living in Oregon, working as a paramedic. Caroline called him that night. Samuel did not hear the whole conversation, only pieces from the kitchen. "Yes, sweetheart. It is really her. She has puppies." "No, I am not joking." Then a long silence. Then Caroline began to cry. 2 days later, Noah drove 11 hours through sleet and mountain passes to reach Samuel's cabin. He was 26 now, taller and broader than in the photographs, with his grandfather's jaw and his grandmother's eyes. He stepped out of his truck wearing a gray hoodie and work boots, and for a moment he stood in the yard as if afraid to move. Luna was on the porch. She stared at him. Noah took one step. "Luna." The sound that came from her was not a bark. It was something deeper, older, pulled from a place where memory and love had waited too long. Then she ran, not with the speed of a young dog, but with everything she had. Noah dropped to his knees in the snow just before she reached him. Luna hit his chest and nearly knocked him backward. He wrapped both arms around her and buried his face in her fur. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry, girl. I looked for you. I swear I looked." Luna pressed against him, trembling. Samuel stood in the doorway and watched Caroline cover her mouth with both hands. There are reunions that feel happy, and there are reunions that feel holy. This one felt like the second kind. Not loud, not perfect, just full of all the years that could not be returned and all the love that had somehow survived them anyway. Noah stayed 3 days. He helped feed the puppies. He repaired a broken porch step without being asked. He sat by the fire and told Samuel about Ranger, about his grandfather, about the day Luna vanished, and how he had carried guilt for more than a decade. "I thought she left because we left," Noah admitted one night. Samuel shook his head. "She didn't leave you. She got lost in grief. There's a difference." Noah looked down at Luna, who was asleep with her head on his boot. "I was a kid. I didn't know dogs could grieve like that. Most people do not understand grief until it changes them," Samuel said. Noah studied him for a moment. "Sounds like you do." Samuel looked toward the fire. He did not answer right away. For a long time, he had believed grief was something private, something a man carried quietly because talking about it made other people uncomfortable. But Luna had walked through a storm with 5 puppies and placed her pain at his door. She had not hidden it. She had asked for help. Maybe there was a lesson in that. "My wife died 8 years ago," Samuel said finally. "After that, I came out here and convinced myself I was choosing peace." Noah waited. "Maybe I was just choosing not to be found." Across the room, Luna lifted her head as if she had heard enough to understand. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. The puppies grew stronger every week. Their eyes brightened. Their legs steadied. Their personalities became impossible to ignore. One dragged socks into a secret pile behind the wood box. One barked at his reflection in the oven door. One followed Caroline everywhere and cried when she left. One learned to climb onto Samuel's chair and fall asleep against his hip as if he had paid the mortgage. Little Scout, the weakest, became the most determined. He was smaller than the others, with one ear that refused to stand up straight. But he moved through the world as if he had personally defeated winter and expected everyone to remember it. He followed Samuel constantly, tripping over his paws, chewing bootlaces, and sleeping beside the old man's chair with total confidence. "You have a shadow," Caroline said one afternoon. Samuel looked down at Little Scout, who was sitting on his foot. "He is temporary." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Sure he is." By March, the snow began to melt from the valley floor. Streams opened. Mud replaced ice. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Luna spent more time on the porch, no longer staring toward the mountains with urgency, but watching the yard where her puppies wrestled in clumsy piles. Samuel drove into town and had the photograph of Luna and Ranger framed. He hung it above the fireplace. When Luna noticed it, she sat beneath it for a long time. She did not whine. She did not paw at the wall. She simply looked. Noah stood beside Samuel. "She remembers him," he said. "I believe she does. Does that make it harder?" Samuel thought about Marlene's photographs in the drawer. He thought about the years he had kept them hidden because seeing them hurt too much. Then he looked at Luna beneath Ranger's picture, calm and steady. "No," he said. "I think remembering only hurts forever when we do it alone." That evening, he opened the drawer in his bedroom and took out Marlene's photograph. It showed her laughing beside the lake in July, one hand lifted to block the sun, her hair blown across her face. Samuel stood there for a long time with the picture in his hands. Then he brought it into the living room and placed it on the mantel near Luna and Ranger. The cabin did not break under the weight of memory. It became warmer. Spring arrived fully in April. Grass returned around the cabin. Birds nested beneath the eaves. The puppies, once fragile enough to fit in Samuel's palms, became tumbling balls of energy, racing through the yard beneath Montana's wide blue sky. Word spread. First it was Earl from down the road. Then Dr. Porter stopped by to check on the litter and stayed for coffee. Then Caroline's church friends came with bags of puppy food. Then families began asking whether any of the puppies would need homes. Samuel did not rush. "Every puppy deserves the right people," he said. Luna seemed to agree. Whenever a family visited, she watched closely. She did not interfere, but she observed. A young couple came one Saturday with two toddlers who pulled tails and shrieked. Luna stood between them and the puppies until Samuel politely ended the visit. Another family arrived with a quiet little girl named Emily, who wore purple glasses and spoke barely above a whisper. She sat cross-legged in the grass while the puppies climbed around her. Little Scout ignored her, but Sleepy One crawled into her lap, sighed, and fell asleep. Emily's mother wiped her eyes. "She hasn't smiled like that in months," she said. "Her dad is deployed, and it has been hard." Luna walked over, sniffed the child gently, and rested her head against Emily's shoulder. Samuel nodded once. "I think Luna made her decision." One by one, the puppies found homes. The bold one went to a ranch family with acres to run. The sock thief went to a retired teacher who promised to keep a drawer just for stolen socks. The gentle one went to Emily. The climber went to Dr. Porter's assistant, who said any dog that determined deserved medical insurance. Little Scout stayed. At first Samuel said it was because he still needed watching. Then he said it was because the puppy was too small to place yet. Then he said he was waiting for the right family. Caroline finally said what everyone knew. "Samuel, that dog found his family the night Luna brought him here." Little Scout was sleeping on Samuel's boot when she said it. Samuel looked down. The puppy opened one eye, thumped his tail once, and went back to sleep. "Maybe," Samuel said. Luna rested nearby in the shade, looking deeply satisfied. By summer, Samuel's cabin had changed beyond recognition. There were dog toys by the door, extra bowls in the kitchen, puppy photographs on the wall, and visitors on the porch more often than not. Caroline came twice a week, sometimes more. Noah visited whenever his work schedule allowed. Earl pretended to stop by only to borrow tools, then spent half an hour throwing sticks for Little Scout. The silence Samuel had once protected had been replaced by barking, laughter, footsteps, and the ordinary noise of life returning. Strangely, he did not miss the silence. One golden evening in June, Samuel sat on the porch while Luna lay beside him and Little Scout chased moths in the yard. The sun lowered behind the mountains. Wildflowers moved in the breeze. Somewhere down the road, a truck passed slowly, then disappeared. Noah leaned against the porch railing. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not heard her?" Samuel watched Little Scout tumble sideways after missing a moth completely. "Yes," he said, and I stopped thinking about it." Noah nodded. Some near misses were too heavy to hold for long. Autumn came with gold cottonwood leaves and cool mornings wrapped in fog. The families who had adopted Luna's puppies sent photographs and letters. Emily's mother wrote that the gentle puppy slept beside Emily every night and seemed to know when she was sad. The ranch family sent a picture of Bold One sitting proudly on a hay bale. The retired teacher mailed a photograph of the sock thief surrounded by laundry, looking unrepentant. Samuel pinned each picture to the wall. "Looks like a family tree," Caroline said. Samuel smiled. "I suppose it is." One October afternoon, Caroline arrived carrying a cardboard box from her attic. Inside were old Mercer family keepsakes from the mountain property. Christmas cards, fishing photos, Daniel's pocket knife, a child's drawing of Luna and Ranger with wings, and one photograph that made everyone go quiet. It showed Caroline years earlier, sitting on the porch of the old cabin with Luna as a puppy in her lap. Ranger lay at her feet. Daniel stood in the background holding a cup of coffee. Noah, maybe 8 years old, was laughing so hard his eyes were closed. A whole life, captured before anyone knew it could disappear. Caroline touched the corner of the photograph. "I thought I had lost this." Luna approached slowly and sat beside her. Caroline looked down. "Do you remember?" Luna rested her head against Caroline's knee. The older woman bent over her and cried. Samuel turned toward the window, giving her privacy, but his own eyes burned. Later that evening, the first snow of the season began to fall. It drifted past the windows gently at first, then thickened until the yard disappeared into white. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Little Scout slept at Samuel's feet. Luna rested beneath Ranger's photograph. Caroline sat in her favorite chair knitting a blanket she claimed was not for any dog, though everyone knew better. "Do you ever wonder why she came to your door?" Caroline asked. Samuel looked at Luna. The question had followed him for months. Why his cabin? Why his porch? Why that night, out of every night? He could give practical answers. His porch light had been on. His cabin was close enough. Maybe Luna had smelled smoke, food, or people. But none of those answers felt complete. "I think she was looking for someone willing to open it," he said. Caroline nodded. "And maybe she knew you needed that too." Samuel did not argue. Outside, snow gathered on the porch steps where Luna's paw prints had once marked the beginning of everything. Years passed more quickly than Samuel expected. Seasons circled the valley. Snow gave way to wildflowers. Summer faded into gold. Winter returned and left again. Through it all, the cabin at the edge of the forest remained full of life. Luna grew older. Gray touched her muzzle. Her steps slowed. She slept more deeply and rose more carefully. But her eyes stayed the same, steady, wise, and full of a peace that had taken years to find. She no longer stared toward the mountains as if something missing might appear between the trees. She no longer paced at sunrise. She had stopped searching, not because she had forgotten, because she had finally been found. Little Scout grew into a strong shepherd with one ear still crooked and a heart far bigger than his body. He followed Samuel everywhere. When Samuel chopped wood, Scout watched. When Samuel checked the fence, Scout supervised. When Samuel sat in his chair, Scout rested beside him as if guarding an old king. The adopted puppies became legends in their own homes. Their families continued sending updates. One helped a retired rancher on long rides. One comforted Emily through her father's deployment and later through her first day of high school. One became a therapy dog at a nursing home. One remained a cheerful thief of socks and dignity. Their photographs filled an entire wall. Visitors often came expecting to hear about the night Luna saved her puppies. They left having heard about loyalty, grief, second chances, and the strange way love keeps finding doors. Samuel changed too. He stopped declining invitations automatically. He went to Caroline's for Thanksgiving. He let Noah take him fishing. He allowed Earl to drag him to the diner in town on Saturday mornings, where people stopped treating him like a ghost and started saving him a seat. One day, Dr. Porter asked if he would speak at a local animal rescue fundraiser. Samuel said absolutely not. Then Luna looked at him from the porch with that same steady patience she had used the morning she led him to the old cabin. He spoke for 6 minutes. It was the shortest speech of the night, and the only one that made half the room cry. He did not talk about heroism. He did not call himself a rescuer. He simply told them that an exhausted dog had once trusted him with what mattered most to her, and that trust had saved more than 5 puppies. It had saved a man who did not. No, he still needed saving. Late one autumn, when Luna was very old, the first storm of the season arrived with a familiar sound. Wind before snow. Samuel stood at the same front door where everything had begun. The porch light glowed against the dark. Snow spun through the air. For a moment, memory became so clear he could almost hear the scratch again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He looked down. Luna stood beside him, older now, her muzzle silver, her body slower, but her posture calm. Scout stood on his other side, strong and alert. Behind them, the cabin glowed with firelight. Photographs covered the walls. Caroline's knitted blanket lay across the couch. Noah's latest postcard sat on the kitchen table. Samuel reached down and scratched behind Luna's ears. "Best decision I ever made," he whispered. Luna leaned gently against his leg. No words. No explanations. Just trust. The same trust she had offered on that first night when she nudged her weakest puppy toward his hands. Much later, after the storm passed, Samuel sat by the fireplace while Luna slept nearby and Scout rested at her side. The cabin was quiet, but not empty. That was the difference he had spent years learning. Quiet could be full. Quiet could hold love. Quiet could be a room where everyone you had lost and everyone you had found seemed to sit with you for a while. Samuel looked at Marlene's photograph on the mantel, then at Luna and Ranger, then at the wall filled with puppies who had grown into blessings scattered across Montana and beyond. Everything in that room existed because one freezing night, a mother dog had refused to give up. She had crossed the snow carrying fear, grief, memory, and hope. She had found a door, and Samuel, who thought he had nothing left to give, had opened it. The miracle had not been waiting somewhere far away. It had been hiding inside that simple decision. Open the door. Help the stranger. Answer the faint cry. Let life interrupt your loneliness. Samuel leaned back as the fire burned low. Luna opened her eyes, met his gaze, and gave the smallest wag of her tail before drifting back to sleep. Outside, snow settled softly across the valley. Inside, peace settled. Across the cabin. And Samuel finally understood the truth Luna had carried to him from the very beginning. Sometimes the door you open for a stranger becomes the doorway to a miracle. And sometimes that miracle stays long enough to become family.